Hi there, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name's Frederick Wheeler and today it's a very wet day over here, it's dark, and I thought I would do something slightly different. Something I have actually been planning not to do, but I am going to do it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey as a dungeon master. I could call it a pilgrimage. In this case it's probably going to need more of a rant, so bear with me. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for many years, but it took me a long time to actually decide to be a game master or a dungeon master. And the very first game that I actually was involved in crafting an adventure for people was actually Star Wars Saga, which I ran for about a year, and shortly after that I ran a very short Dungeons and Dragons game. At that point, a person who I thought was my friend, I had a falling out with them. I was playing probably too much Dungeons and Dragons and it was taking over a lot of my life, and suddenly it was no longer there and I had a crisis in my life. Sounds ridiculous, but it does happen sometimes. At this point I had to make a decision, and I decided to actually start my own game group. And I invited my family. I didn't actually run this for my friends. It was a family game only. My only guide to being a dungeon master at the time was the people that I had seen dungeon mastering for me, and what I had read on the internet, and what I had read out of the Dungeon Master Guide. And the very first one that I ran was actually 4th edition. Not 5th edition. I tried following the traditional ideas and beliefs and methods that I had been presented with for running my game. I spent many hours making sure I had prepared enough material for the adventure. Often it never got used. I made pretty much every mistake you can possibly imagine. I spent hours and hours rereading the player's handbook to actually make sure that I knew exactly what I was doing. And I still made mistakes, and I still confused my players. I also got upset when the players did not know the rules or how to run their character. And actually I still do sometimes, but it's still something you have to try to get over. It's going to be one of those things that people will put their time into it if they're really interested, and others will simply not have the time to do so. As I said, I made every mistake you can possibly imagine as a new dungeon master, and I really did try really hard to make sure that I knew exactly what I was doing. And I think for me, and I suspect for a lot of other dungeon masters, this is just a normal process. So I was running games for some time, I was getting better at it, and then I noticed that some of the advice I was getting wasn't always working. In fact, it's actually creating problems for me, and I wasn't happy with what was going on. Because I hadn't learned by trial and error, I had learned by what I was told I should do. I made a very definite decision that I was actually going to figure this out myself. There were things I needed to learn, and I needed to make the mistakes myself to understand why I needed to do a certain thing a particular way. I have spent many years testing, discovering, breaking a lot of the rules that I had assumed I should do as a dungeon master, trying to figure out exactly what works. So the first major thing I want to say is that every player and every dungeon master is completely different. Some of them are going to have similarities, but we're all different, which means we have different interests, we operate differently, we have different personalities, we have different ideas of what is actually fun. Every single problem that I came across, and you will probably come across, you're going to make mistakes trying to solve them, and in some situations there's going to be no solution to the problem. When I was dungeon mastering, I didn't actually realise that the dungeon master who's the referee for the rules is also a referee for the player's behaviour at the table. Now you would hope that the group will manage that, but often that's just not the case, and I often found that I was having to manage other people's behaviour, well, there's pretty much two ways you can deal with that. The first one is you can be selective about the people that play at your table. And the other one is managing different personalities at the table. You're going to have to learn how to manage other people. So there's a whole bunch of things that I'm going to go through right now that I use, that I have learned over time by trial and error. It's all right to make mistakes, and you can make the same mistake again. But if it's a constant thing, you know there's a problem. But it's all right to make mistakes. New DMs shouldn't try to run a public game, not till you're ready. It's much more difficult than trying to run a private game with your friends or family. It's more frustrating, and sometimes it's actually less fun. The adventure, the story, is not my creation as the Dungeon Master. It's actually the players. The players' characters, that's what it's about. And I can tell you now, it took me a long time to realise that. Players really like to take their own path. They like to make choices, so give them something where they can actually make a choice. Do they go left? Do they go right? Do they go down the middle? Or do they do something you never ever expected, and can you go with that? As I've already said, all players have different styles of play, and I'm not going to go into all of them because there's a lot to discuss, but they also have different ideas of what is fun. Some of those ideas of fun aren't very socially acceptable, and they're not very good for group play and teamwork. So when it comes to preparing material, 1 page. Prepare enough for 1 session. An A4 page is enough. You don't need any more. Sandbox style adventures work better than plot driven adventures. It's just one of those things. They allow for players to make decisions. Something that has events that need to occur and players need to follow each thing like a railroad or a linear line. Don't present options or choices to players, and players don't really like that. If you're going to run a pre-made adventure, and I run a lot of pre-made adventures, I have to accept that sometimes it's going to go off course, and more often than not it probably will. So just go with that. If it goes off course, you can ditch the book, and you're going to be getting that A4 page out, and you're going to have to start writing some stuff yourself. That's what I do. Now, I know a lot of people believe that Dungeons and Dragons is a game of strategy, but I would like to point out that this game is not a true game of strategy. It uses dice. You make choices, and the results of those actions are determined by random dice. This game is actually a gambling game, so don't believe that it's actually a game of true strategy. If we were playing chess, that would be a game of true strategy. This is one of the things I've had to accept and understand, that it's not the player's fault when things go bad. Sometimes it is because they made a bad choice, but quite often it's simply because they rolled poorly on the dice, or I rolled really, really well. Game balance is utterly impossible. Now, when I was play testing the monster manual, I can tell you now that I had 5th level characters pushing right through and bulldozing very, very high level challenges. I wasn't given the challenge rating for these monsters. It's absolutely impossible to get game balance, so simply don't worry about it. Present a really broad range of challenges: easy, medium, hard, and impossible. There's always some way of the players dealing with that situation, and if they can't, it simply doesn't matter. Okay, here we go. Technology. We're talking about cell phones, laptops. Are they good? Are they bad? They're not bad. You just need to use them to your advantage. So now when I see cell phones come out and laptops and people are playing games, I start encouraging my players to download and use apps and programs that help them run their character and how to learn the game. Character death. Okay, character death, bad thing? No. Character death doesn't bring the story to an end or the adventure. And it doesn't have to ruin your game. There are lots of different ways of dealing with that, whether that's raise dead, reincarnate, having them captured. And to be fair, it doesn't actually have to be the end of that particular character's adventure. You can continue the story while they're dead. Now, I'll go into this in more detail. It doesn't mean that every time somebody's character dies, I used to think, okay, when a character dies, that means they've got to make a new character. I came from tabletop wargaming, where when things died, they were dead. That was it. Had to change all of that, try to understand that just because a character dies does not mean it's the end of that character's story. Okay, so this is a Dungeon Master screen, fudging the dice behind the screen. I don't do it anymore. I used to do it. I used to do it to make sure that my battles were climactic when I had the climactic battle. I used to do it when I was worried that a character would die and I felt bad for them. I just don't do that now. It takes the surprise away from me. It takes the surprise away from the players. And as soon as they start to realise that you are actually fudging the dice behind there, then you're starting to bring into a lot of resentment about that sort of thing. So I just don't fudge it anymore. What falls is what falls. Okay, magic items. Magic items can break the game, but magic items can be awesome too. So don't worry about having magic items in your game. Put them in. You're a dungeon master, you have a world, you do not have to create the entire world. I don't create the entire world. Sometimes all I do is create a name, just the name of a village or a town, and that's all I start with, and then I build from there. Humour. Now, I'm not a particularly funny guy, but humour in an adventure is good, and it will not ruin your game. It's all right to be funny. It's all right to have a humorous moment. It takes the tension away. You can't always have a whole lot of tension throughout the entire session, where you never break that feeling, that build up. It's just too stressful for people. Off-topic comments, jokes. Oh, they disrupt the game. No, they don't have to disrupt the game. How did I deal with this? Every time people would make something that I considered off-topic, I actually considered it part of their character's discussion, what their character actually said. I made it part of the game. That means every time you make an off-topic comment at my table, you have to be aware that the consequences, I will take that as what your character said. A lot of off-topic conversations stop after that, and you will find the game progresses. You don't have to worry about waiting for people to actually stop talking about what they did, because you have built it into the game. They'll learn. Try everything, absolutely everything, at least once. At least once before you decide to ditch it because you think it doesn't work. Would you believe it that Dungeons and Dragons can be addictive? Be warned. It's not just alcohol, drugs, cocaine, medication that can be addictive, or gambling for money. You're actually playing a game that's about gambling, so it can be addictive. Family, friends, work and life are far more important than Dungeons and Dragons. I have lost friends over playing Dungeons and Dragons. I haven't spent enough time with my family because of Dungeons and Dragons. I have spent vastly too much time at work preparing for Dungeons and Dragon games when I should have been working. I have allowed weeds to crop up around my home because I've been preparing for Dungeons and Dragons when I should have been dealing with things like bills. Things like this. Got to pay the bills. Something that's become vastly more important to me is how people feel about playing the game. I'm not as concerned about how a character is role-played these days. I'm more concerned about how the player feels. Are they having a good time? Players' feelings, how they feel about interacting in the group, for me, it's the most important thing. Okay, so I've talked about fudging roles, but players don't like it when players cheat, and they will call them out on that, but they don't like it when the Dungeon Master cheats. And I know a lot of people will say, well, Dungeon Masters can't cheat. But I have started to realise that this is part of the reason why I don't fudge my rolls anymore, because people discovered I was. So, just something for you to think about. I try not to cheat. Probably the most common thing that I have heard people say is the Dungeon Master is God. And what I needed to learn was the Dungeon Master is God, but he shouldn't be God, or she shouldn't be God. In my case, I should not approach it as I am God. That's not a good way to deal with the game. It's an interplay between the players and me, and we are building a story, and that's really what it needs to be. Players always like more power, so give them the power, but also take it away. It's all part of the adventure. So no game system or D&D rule set is perfect. I'm not saying don't make house rules, but I don't have a lot of house rules. I've accepted that no game system is perfect, and I would have preferred that D&D 5e was a little bit simpler, easier for me to teach to children, but it isn't. But I need to accept that, and I have. It's sort of part of the journey of being a dungeon master, to realise that you can't fix everything. It's impossible to make the perfect game system. So spend your time doing other things, crafting a really good adventure. Oh, having an evil party would be so cool. It sounds cool. What I've discovered is it's not cool. It's not cool when you're the DM. Some of the players will find it hilarious and love it. But running it as a DM sucks. Improvising. Having to do things on the fly. Improvising is a skill. It's something you have to practice over time, and you have to keep doing it to get better and to actually maintain that level of skill. I have done everything I can over the years to try to improve it as much as I possibly can, and I am still doing that. Everybody's journey is different. My journey will not be the same as you, and you will probably come to different conclusions as you learn the ropes. But if you found any of this really helpful or interesting, which you may or may not have, please share, like and subscribe. But more importantly, make a comment below. If there's anything that I started to discuss in this video that you would like me to discuss in more detail or elaborate or expand on, I'll make another video on it. And also, if you're starting out as a dungeon master, by all means tell me what the experience was like. Tell me about that sort of stuff. If you've been DMing for years and you would like to tell me some of the stories that you have, I would love to hear them. Until next time, keep rolling those 20s.